I am delighted to have on the phone with me Amanda Barker. Good morning, Amanda.
Good morning.
We're going to talk about the cold case, the permafrost puzzle. Amanda is a research chemist with the Cold Regions Research Laboratory, otherwise known as CREL, and we are going to have a little fun and we're going to make everybody cold this morning, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to just dive right into this conversation, and I want you to tell me about yourself and your background.
Awesome. Well, I'm so happy to be talking on this show. So my name is Amanda Barker. I'm a research chemist with CREL, and I am stationed up in Fairbanks, Alaska. So really cold, really far north. I have a PhD in environmental chemistry from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. And I moved up here probably about 14 years ago. I'm originally from West Virginia, so I knew nothing about cold, knew nothing about permafrost or anything like that, and just decided I wanted to experience the cold north, and moved up and kind of fell in love with everything, the culture, just the harsh winters, the beautiful summers, the midnight sun. And yeah, I've been up here for about 14 years.
Wow.
And just love doing the research up here and just everything about living in Alaska.
That's great. That's great. That's great that you love what you do. So what is your role at ERDC?
Yeah, so mentioned before, I'm a chemist. A lot of what I do focuses on sort of understanding how the biogeochemical landscape changes. And this could be kind of a variety of changes. We tend to focus more recently a lot on climate change issues, but we also do a lot of sort of contamination work, and then we can also look at different sort of material issues. So anywhere from like chemical coatings to contaminants in the environment, really anything that chemistry changes in the environment or for even human activity. So kind of more recently, climate change has been a big focus in how increasing air temperatures impacts permafrost.
Mm-hmm. So you just opened the door to what is permafrost and where is it found?
Yeah, so I mentioned before, I'm from West Virginia. I knew nothing about permafrost. I didn't even know it was a thing. And so there's probably a lot of people maybe listening to this show who don't know what permafrost is. So permafrost is anything in the subsurface. So this could be soil, sticks, rocks, anything that's found in the subsurface that is permanently frozen for 2 years or more. And it tends to be found in cold climate regions. So this is kind of anywhere in the Arctic. So Alaska has quite a bit of permafrost, Russia, China, areas in Eastern Europe, Finland, Sweden, and then areas like Greenland, Canada. And sometimes you'll find it, we call it sort of mountainous permafrost. So locations that are high elevation. So even mountains in Hawaii people have found permafrost in sort of high mountainous regions, but it tends to be local. Yeah, Hawaii does have a high elevation mountain, but it tends to be localized, of course, in the Arctic. And it is this sort of ever-present, stable ground sort of subsystem that it's a huge part of sort of everyone's lives in the Arctic. And people don't maybe realize that it is present in kind of a lot of areas in the Arctic.
Well, okay. So ERDC is home to some incredibly unique facilities across the nation, and there is one that I am so intrigued by. I watched the video that an interview you did, and I'm just, again, so intrigued by our conversation today. Our Permafrost Tunnel in Fox, Alaska. So can you tell me about the history of the tunnel and its significance?
Yeah, okay. So the Permafrost Tunnel is definitely sort of one of the premier ERDC facilities that probably a lot of people don't get to go to because it's so far north, very far away. But yeah, the Permafrost Tunnel in Fox, Alaska, it's about 10 miles north of Fairbanks. And it's one of the only facilities like it in the world. And ERDC and Corel have done a lot of work in the last maybe decade or so to really, make it nice and expand the footprint. And so we can do this, amazing research. So the Permafrost Tunnel was excavated by the U.S. Army back in the 1960s. And it was originally just kind of one long tunnel, maybe about 70 meters long. And it just goes right into the hillside of a permafrost-rich kind of a mountain, sort of a hill slope. Mm-hmm. And it was originally excavated. There was a lot of interest back in the 1960s of how can we, what are our ways that we can better insulate equipment or people, or what can we do to kind of find things that can act as an insulator or a barrier. And they had known that Alaska has a lot of earthquakes, and the earthquakes don't really seem to affect the ground that much. So they were thinking, okay, permafrost might be a great insulator. We can, tunnel into it and then put stuff there, and it's going to be safe. Mm-hmm. So they decided to build this tunnel, and it was a little bit modeled. If you've ever heard of the Camp Century in Greenland, that has subsurface tunnels, also excavated by the U.S. Army. It was a little bit designed and thought of to be something like a mini Camp Century. And after they excavated it, it turned out it wasn't actually great. A lot of, permafrost gets hot, it can start to thaw. And so they decided it wasn't great for what they were thinking, but what it was great for was research. And so shortly thereafter, they turned over the Permafrost Tunnel to ERDC and Corel and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, USAID. Mm-hmm. And we have been doing research there ever since. And a lot of what the tunnel looks like today, which is probably 10 times the footprint that it was in the 1960s, is because of this desire and push for Arctic research, trying to understand how increasing air temperatures and climate change are impacting the Arctic and permafrost in particular. So what's really great, if you ever get to visit the Permafrost Tunnel, is, we have sensors everywhere, and we're just constantly sort of collecting this live, continuous data, and you can see the changes that are going on sort of in situ. You can really sort of see what permafrost is, and you can touch it and you can get close up to it. And then also above the tunnel, so above the permafrost tunnel, actually on the surface, we have also the live, we have active field sites where we're looking at kind of modern. So the permafrost tunnel is what we sort of call the Pleistocene time frame. So it's kind of ancient permafrost. So anywhere from 10,000 years old to 50,000 years old. And so we can kind of look at the past, and then above the tunnel, we're looking at modern soil. So we can actually compare and look at past events that can maybe inform what's going to happen in the future.
That's mind-blowing. So how does permafrost affect climate and the environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mentioned before the permafrost primarily lies in the Arctic, but it really is far-reaching. Essentially almost the whole state of Alaska has some presence of permafrost, whether it's very thick or isolated or just in little spots, but it still does make a huge difference when thinking about, water transport to the ocean is a good example. So what's really important about permafrost, it makes the ground stable. You can think of permafrost as this really unique and kind of interesting stability factor for the ground. So it makes the ground kind of watertight. It maintains wetlands across the Arctic tundra. It provides a unique habitat for sort of specific animals and plants. It really makes the ground frozen. I mean, it's frozen, it makes it stable. And what is going on more recently is that that's starting to change. Mm-hmm. So once permafrost starts to thaw, sort of the entire environment does begin to alter. So permafrost itself, if it's frozen, is this really good barrier for, it could be anywhere from things like contaminants, this unique frozen barrier, or just providing the land stability. So roads, infrastructure, things like that are just more stable when the ground is frozen. And we've actually done, Crow also has a whole engineering division that looks at how can we, now that permafrost is thawing, how can we artificially keep the ground frozen? Because we really want the ground to stay frozen. Mm-hmm. And that's also something that we've looked into, is how can we artificially keep the ground frozen?
Well, see, and then that means we can dive into this next question. So what are some of the main threats to permafrost from human activities and global warming?
Yeah, so permafrost is actively thawing in a lot of different areas, particularly where I live in Fairbanks, Alaska. We call it the interior Alaska. It's in the discontinuous zone. So we have a lot of permafrost, but it's not actually in every location. So when you're in up north, and we call it the North Slope of Alaska, that is in the continuous permafrost zone, and permafrost is everywhere, up to 1,000 meters thick. So those areas, while they're still measured thaw, aren't as vulnerable. It's really the areas like the interior Alaska where you have permafrost in these kind of large pockets. They're a lot more vulnerable to thaw. And so we're seeing kind of this, intense changes, not even on the time scale of decades, but just years, months even. We're seeing, when we go above the Permafrost Tunnel, every summer it looks different. You can see new lakes that have popped up. You can see new sinkholes that have formed, trees that are falling over. So in terms of, what's causing that, a lot of what we're seeing, at least in our field sites that are kind of, quote, pristine, is from, it's just getting hotter. It's just the air temperatures are increasing. We're also seeing more rapid precipitation, so just more rainfall, which can create this sort of thermal gradient once it soaks into the subsurface that just has this sort of carries with it heat. And so we're seeing mostly those two things are the biggest ones that are sort of non-human caused.
Right.
Human activities, sometimes we'll see some things that people don't think about, like snow shoveling, like removing snow from the ground. Snow is an amazing insulator. And so a large snowpack will actually insulate the ground, and then it's going to thaw less. And then also removing vegetation. So vegetation also helps to just keep everything stable. So removing, a bunch of trees where there's permafrost, a bunch of vegetation will cause more rapid thaw. And so kind of things like that can exacerbate something that you might already be seeing with thawing permafrost that's vulnerable. But kind of the main stuff that we look at are increasing air temperature and precipitation. Those are kind of the major ones.
The major factors, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, but again, how do you measure and monitor permafrost conditions and changes? So, how does that measured?
Yeah, so we kind of do a lot of different things. The most simple and the one that we have sort of large networks of sensors are just a soil temp. So soil temperature, and these are little probes that we can insert into the ground and just track soil temperature, and more importantly, track where permafrost is located, at what depth. So a lot of our sensors, for example, we have some sensors up north on the North Slope of Alaska at a Naviat Creek watershed. And we've seen in the past about 5 years, the depth of permafrost used to be at about 50, 55 centimeters. And now it's almost at 65 centimeters. So just in about 5 years, we've seen about 10 centimeters of thaw. And so
that's not good.
It's very noticeable,
right?
Particularly with sensors. And it's a particularly vulnerable watershed with it's mostly comprised of just kind of this, quote, pure tundra. And there's a lot of changes to, as I mentioned before, with precipitation and sort of hydrology of Arctic watersheds. There's a lot of changes to water movement and where it's pooling and where it's sort of located. So we also measure soil moisture is a really common measurement to couple with soil temperature. So we have these probes that measure both simultaneously. And so we can see, okay, is the permafrost, one, getting warmer, and kind of two, is it drying out or is it getting more wet? So sometimes you'll see, depending on the soil type, permafrost is drying out instead of getting wetter. And that's really important to understand because that's going to play a role in kind of carbon emissions. If it's more wet versus dry, is it waterlogged? Is it not waterlogged? So we also measure soil moisture a lot with our soil temperature. And then some of the other things that we do, kind of an easier measurement that we're out there, every September, October, we're just measuring, we call it depth to permafrost. So we take kind of a metal stick, essentially, and shove it into the ground. And whenever it stops, where we can't push anymore, that's where the permafrost is located, because permafrost is very hard and stable. And so wherever we hit it, that's where permafrost is located. So we'll do that across large transects just to get kind of a large network of permafrost active layer depth.
Wow. So have you ever been surprised by some of your findings in your research?
Of course. Yeah, definitely. I always say that, whenever we go out to do field work, I'm convinced we will always find a cool story. Like I'm never worried that we're going to have these large field campaigns and we're not going to find anything. We're not going to find anything cool. We're not going to see anything, large changes, because we always do.
Right.
We always find just these crazy, like, I didn't know this was happening. I think that the most kind of recent and interesting thing that we've been working on a lot, and just I was very surprised, is we've been looking at what we've called the rusting of the Arctic, and there's kind of a few different groups looking at this as well. So we've recently went up to the North Slope of Alaska, and I've just seen the rivers are just turning orange, way more than was ever previously kind of noted. So a lot of the work that we've recently been doing is on iron. So everyone's kind of seen iron rust, or sort of oxidized iron. It's that bright orange color. And a lot in the south, especially where I'm from in West Virginia, you have acid mine drainage. So it's a similar color, similar idea that rivers are turning orange, except it's a very different process. So it's not from mining like it is in West Virginia and areas like that. It's actually just from permafrost thaw. So as permafrost thaws, we have seen a sort of significant release of iron. So there's a lot of iron in Alaska soils just kind of naturally. And so we've seen just a lot of increased mineral weathering. So iron is being released as a result of permafrost thaw, and it's coloring watersheds bright orange in the summer. And that's really kind of the most recent stark change that we've noticed, and it's kind of entirely attributed to permafrost thaw.
Wow. I mean, I'm going to say that a lot probably during this interview. It's just wow. So I understand that permafrost stores large amounts of carbon. Can you tell us about that and about what happens when it thaws?
Yes, carbon. Carbon's always the sort of the big ticket item. Everyone's worried about carbon.
Right.
And permafrost, as they should be. So permafrost is really interesting with respect to carbon in that there's so much. And I don't think, and I didn't understand this either until I sort of saw it. I don't think people understand how much carbon actually is in permafrost. So permafrost is, it essentially takes whatever material it is, sticks, whatever, old tree roots, and it just freezes them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really degrade them a ton. In the permafrost tunnel, we'll have 50,000-year-old sticks that look perfect. I mean, they don't look like they've been degraded at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, you just have so much carbon that is just hanging out in permafrost. And it's not really doing too much if it stays solid frozen. But as it starts to thaw, you get microbes that are, perfectly alive. Once they start to thaw, they're preserved in permafrost, and they'll start to kind of munch on whatever energy source is there. And carbon is a great energy source. And so they'll start to kind of munch on carbon, and that will release, as a kind of a byproduct of that chemical reaction, biochemical reaction, it will release carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And so it's a little bit of a ticking time bomb. As permafrost thaws, you just have this insanely large pool of carbon kind of ready to be turned into CO2 and methane. And so it creates this positive feedback cycle where as permafrost thaws, you release CO2 and methane, and they're, of course, strong greenhouse gases, mm-hmm. and that contributes to more or a higher degree of increasing air temperatures, and that will thaw permafrost to a greater extent. So it's this kind of positive feedback cycle that is definitely people, climate modelers and researchers like that are a little nervous, I guess, about permafrost and carbon issue, and they're also just trying to grasp the level of release that we might be seeing, because there's just so much permafrost. So being able to try and kind of model and predict mm-hmm. what we're going to see is definitely a kind of a field that a lot of people are working on.
Wow. So much work to be done, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this year we're celebrating how the labs came together 25 years ago to form one ERDC, one organization of experts across multiple disciplines. How do you collaborate with the other laboratories or organizations that assist with permafrost research?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ERDC Lab, of course, Corral is an ERDC lab, and we're very proud to be one. We actually work quite a bit with other ERDC labs in doing permafrost research. So we've had this last summer, and we'll continue to have collaborations with particularly environmental labs. We have a lot of sort of EL folks that come up, and whether they're working on contamination issues or wildfire issues more recently, we've collaborated with them quite a bit. And then also we've worked with GSL, mm-hmm. And they've come up to look at kind of structural infrastructure changes and trying to understand kind of the more engineering aspect of shifting in terrain as a result of permafrost thaw. And then other, of course, GRL, the Geospatial Research Lab, looking at remote sensing and how can we sort of predict changes on kind of the almost landscape, even global scale of, using remote sensing techniques and looking at changes over a large scale. And then, a lot of, so many labs, other organizations and other labs are working on kind of Arctic permafrost research. So certainly Department of Energy is kind of a big player, and we've collaborated with them looking at kind of permafrost thaw and more carbon mm-hmm. issues. And then USGS, US Geological Survey, they're focused quite a bit on permafrost thaw and carbon modeling. And then I think kind of more recently, I was just mentioning the Arctic rusting phenomenon that we're looking into. Even organizations like the National Park Service and Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, they're very interested in how, particularly on a localized scale, how permafrost thaw might be impacting things like water quality. And sort of water quality, this could be even for communities and villages and fish abundance. Things like subsistence hunting and fishing are being sort of significantly affected by permafrost thaw. So you even have these like large federal organizations, but you also have kind of local community organizations, the state of Alaska, that are concerned and looking at this issue of how is this impacting kind of local communities.
Collaboration, right? So what are some of the potential impacts of permafrost thaw on ecosystems, wildlife, and human communities across the world?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So certainly I think when people think of permafrost thaw, they maybe don't think of, this could affect humans or this could affect, animals or things like that. But it definitely really can. I think probably the easiest thing that we're seeing is anything to do with land stability. So this can be things like roads, infrastructure, increased cost of construction and maintenance. So just as simple as, like my house currently is shifting as a result of permafrost thaw.
Wow, that's scary.
For me, it's also increased money, right? Like drywall cracking, your door no longer shuts fully, you can't quite lock the deadbolt. Little things like that, as a result of permafrost thaw, happens to almost everyone that lives in Alaska, or at least for sure in a northern latitude that has permafrost. And so little things like that, I think, are the easiest to see. These are things that we deal with daily. Damaged roads. If you've ever driven in Alaska, we have absolutely ridiculous roads. Just as permafrost thaws and shifts, obviously the road is also going to shift. So we'll have cracks in roads, big potholes. Poor DOT, Department of Transportation, we call it, there's two seasons, winter in Alaska and then construction season.
Those are different. Okay.
They're always fixing the roads. And so that's, I think, the easiest to see. Foundation repairs, damaged airport runways that you can no longer land a plane in a village because the runway, is too cracked. Things like that. But then there's also kind of more like insidious issues that you don't maybe notice at first. And these are things like a food security issue. So you can no longer drive to a village or land a plane until you fix the runway. And so then there creates kind of a food security issue. Then there's things like sinkholes and landslides. Those are a pretty big concern when the ground gets unstable. You can actually create these kind of large sinkholes that just form. I mean, stories like even at the University of Alaska Fairbanks here on kind of the trail system, there's sinkholes that can form. And then you don't really know that it's going to happen. So things like that are kind of a bit more scary. And then in terms of kind of altered ecosystems. So as I mentioned, all the rivers in the Arctic are starting to turn orange to a greater extent. That can create issues with like water quality. We now have a system that is no longer kind of watertight. And so we're getting kind of flushing out of whatever happens to be in the system, or weathering of minerals and movement of potential contaminants that kind of were not supposed to move. And so that could create water quality issues. And anything with water quality in kind of surface waters, you can imagine, the fish maybe don't want to be there anymore. So you'll get changes to fish movement, fish abundance, biota abundance, and then that's going to change things like pH and nutrients. And so that's going to change things like vegetation. any vegetation change is gonna alter movement of animals and migration of animals and where they're located. And then that's going to, of course, scale up. Since subsistence hunting is so huge in Alaska, it's going to impact where people are hunting, what people are hunting for, whether it's moose or caribou or whatever it might be. So you can sort of start to see the trickle effect of, thawing permafrost impacting water quality, vegetation. I mean, just so many things that can kind of be scaled up the food chain. And so it definitely, you start to kind of realize how rapid the changes are here, and kind of small changes might have very big consequences.
So how do you adapt to those risks?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, and a lot of what my research does is kind of very basic. So I think the biggest thing for kind of adaptation, at least at this stage, because we're honestly still trying to figure out all of the detailed large-scale changes. I mean, it's almost like we're still kind of in it. We're still kind of figuring that out. So I think, at least for me and my research, the biggest way to adapt is just to focus on really trying to understand the impact. Like if, for example, your house is shifting. I mean, just trying to understand, not just doing kind of minimal changes or fixing it, trying to really make your system okay with permafrost thaw. So, for example, you can make engineers are amazing. So you can make buildings now that are capable of withstanding changes in permafrost. And the U.S. Army is doing a lot of amazing research with trying to just make buildings and infrastructure and runways and roads just capable of taking those shifts.
Right.
And being able to absorb the shifts and still perform at a high level. So I think definitely focusing on not just repairs, but designing and thinking of systems that can adapt to landscape kind of alterations is kind of the new future, at least for kind of infrastructure. And then in terms of course, the carbon emissions and kind of this global warming, just trying to have better models. And of course, models essentially cannot be good unless you have better kind of ground truthing and field measurements. So kind of that iteration of better sensors, better data sets, so that modelers can feed those into their models, and then we have a better understanding of what potential future predictions and what might happen in the future. I think that's really key to figuring out how to adapt to all this.
Well, your research is just so important. Thank you for what you do. So what would you like listeners to learn from this valuable conversation?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. I think as a scientist, and I love being a scientist, so I'm definitely like, that's my purview and that's kind of how I view the world. I think at least for just listeners and trying to kind of take something away from this awesome conversation, I think just trying to look around your environment and trying to look at kind of small changes. Even, not even thinking about permafrost or the Arctic or climate change, but I think it's important just to look around your environment, which I feel like a lot of people maybe don't do, and just kind of notice small changes and see how they might have kind of a big consequence on your life or the world or other people or animals, and just kind of think about what little changes you might be able to do to kind of help the environment or whatever it may be. And I think for going back to kind of the permafrost, just kind of understanding that in the Arctic, we see such rapid changes. And so it's hard maybe for people who aren't located in the Arctic to understand, permafrost is thawing. It's maybe, I don't know. I don't see permafrost. I don't know what it's like. It's, it's not doing very much. But I think it's important to realize that up here in the Arctic, we are seeing, changes on the scale of like months. It is, apparent and rapid, and kind of huge things are happening kind of every year.
Right.
I feel like that's important to think about. Small changes can have kind of big consequences.
And climate change is real. I mean, I think this show is going to be eye-opening for a lot of people. So
and I think if anyone wants to really feel that climate change is real, they should just come to the Arctic, because you will not be able to drive. It'll be very apparent. Like, there's definitely no question if you visit the Arctic.
Wow.